Okay, let's get started. Everyone can hear me, right? Loud and clear? Cool. So good news is this is not going to be too long. It's going to be about 20 to 25 minutes. I know you guys love to get back to your work. The second thing is what I'm going to be sharing is actually something very simple. Yeah. There's this famous quote where they say that most of the time it's important to remind people rather than instruct. So in order to remind people, you need to keep it simple. And the reason I'm keeping it simple is because this is not new. And also given the fact that all of you guys are very competent folks. That's why y'all are working in Sysco LABS. But I want to remind these facts because they play a major role in the way you and I and managers work. So by managers, what I'm referring to here is anyone who is a lead in their own way is also mentoring someone or managing someone, right? Not the official manager title. Anyone who is mentoring or leading a team, that's what I'm referring to as manager here, in addition to the senior management, right? So I thought this topic would be more appropriate because within my 6 months here, and also with my previous experience, this seems to be the most recurring problem, right? And if you Google search, you'll find enough of articles of why things don't work out well. And that's because there's a gap between managers and the staff. And that's what I'm going to harp on about. It's about what things that we can do, you and I, very simple stuff. And I hope that you guys, at the end of this presentation, that you all will be able to tweak a little way the way you all approach things, and it will bring out a difference in the future. So, I think people who are there in the Nexus might know about this, but how many here knows about the XY theory? Raise your hands. I'm not going to ask questions, but raise your hands if you know the XY theory. No one? Okay. Jeremy, come on. Raise your hands. So this is Douglas McGregor's XY theory. What it simply states is that X is where management pretty much are dictators. Yeah, in a way. They pretty much bark the orders, and the staff, people like you and I, are simply, we just execute them. So it's very authoritarian. There's very tight control, more process, stuff like that. As a result, it's not a very open environment. There's very little self-development and so forth. Whereas theory Y is all about management playing a more facilitating role, right? And by doing that, we are creating an environment of continuous improvement. There's empowerment or responsibility. There's room to fail fast and manifold. So how many things, or how many of you think here is better? Is it theory Y? Is it a Y style or an X style? Raise your hands. How many says it's X? You? How many says it's Y? Okay, almost everyone. But here's the sad part. The thing is, we fail in this, right? Most of the time, I'm not saying that everyone has this problem, but most of the time, the problem happens here is because we are unable to execute this very successfully because of the gap between managers and the staff. And you can't blame it because you should look at it. When companies start up with a pretty much startup mentality in IT, everything is open, right? Your main thing is to get something out, and there are no processes and so forth, which makes sense. But as organizations evolve, there is a need for hierarchy, right? There's no doubt that hierarchy is very important. I mean, there's hierarchy at our own homes. You have father, the mother, and then the children makes the calls, right? Even in a cricket team, you have a captain, vice captain, and so forth. So there is hierarchy in everything that you are involved in, almost, right? So there's no denying the importance of it. So what I'm going to share in the next few points is how you, and not just the managers, but even you, can make a difference in bridging the gap. And that's what we're going to cover in the next 15 minutes. So, in my view, the fundamental failure where this breaks is the minute we stop thinking as a team. I'm not talking about your teams. Yes, you have your team of developers, QEs, and so forth. I'm not talking about that team. I'm talking about us as a team. See, you might have the MD, you might have the directors, you might have the managers, and so forth. But the end goal, guys, is that we are all achieving the same goal. It's just that each of us are executing it in a different way to achieve that goal. We are supposed to complement each other. So what we fundamentally need to understand is that we are a team, right? And a team is a nice definition is that together everyone achieves more. Even though we have the different levels, right? We are one team. And a perfect example is what Mani shared yesterday, right? People credit him with the success of Sysco LABS. But his parting words were, guys, I just did the start. But the end result was brought about a collective effort. And that is proof itself on how important the management and you and I needs to work together as a team. If we don't believe in that, everything else fails. If we think that management is not a part of a team and they are just a separate bunch of folks, it's not going to work, right? Because superstars alone is not going to be enough when you're going to be working in corporates or in other future organizations that are growing. So we need to work as a team. But what enables us to work as a team? Trust. To be able to believe in someone, right? Everyone agrees with that? Anyone wants to give a different definition? No? So here's the thing. What we normally say, we believe in someone, right? We normally trust people also based on the experience. So if someone experience comes you haven't worked before, you would trust that person because he or she may possess that knowledge or comes with that experience. So you believe that person might do the job done. The other way of earning trust is that you spend some time, right? Aruna, I'm sure between Hasit and I, you would trust Hasita more because you have worked with Hasita more. I'm just been here for 6 months and we're learning, we're evolving. But that trust is called predictive trust, which is fine. But the trust I'm going to touch base today is called vulnerability trust. So I'm going to play this video, which will explain this much better, and afterwards I'll share my own experience of how vulnerability trust takes a long way in being a team, in making a team very strong. I would advise you that afterwards you actually, if you are interested, you take the full video because this basically talks about 5 dysfunctions of a team, and it's quite an eye-opener.
Okay, so let's talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. The first dysfunction of a team is the absence of trust. So I just told you that this stuff is simple. You're hearing this. If you're hearing it for the first time, you're thinking, no duh. Did this guy just say, if you want to build a team, you have to trust each other? Yeah, it's so obvious, isn't it? And I realize that, and it is. But there's something about trust. Most people think about trust in a different way than I'm talking about it. See, most people think of trust as predictive trust, which means you and I have known each other long enough now to where if I say something, you'll be able to predict my behavior. Or if we're in a meeting or in a team and you do something, I know what I can expect from you because we can predict one another's behavior. That's predictive trust. And any group of people that's known each other for a long period of time can have predictive trust, but that's not the kind of trust that makes a team great. The kind of trust that makes a team great is what I call vulnerability-based trust. Vulnerability-based trust. That's the kind of trust that comes about when human beings on a team can and will genuinely say things to one another like, I don't know the answer, I need help, I think I really messed this up, you are much smarter than I am, can you teach me how to be like you, or I'm sorry, what I said yesterday was totally out of line, and I apologize. When human beings can be that emotionally buck naked, if you will, with each other, not pretending to be something they're not, when they can be that vulnerable, it changes the dynamics on a team completely. It is one of the most powerful things you can do on a team because people come and they're open and they're honest and it changes everything. And one of the best ways we can understand this is to think about times we've been on teams that didn't have that. Let me tell you a story about one of those teams. I once worked with a startup company in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live. And it was a startup technology company, but it wasn't your typical garage startup. It was a startup on steroids, if you will. I mean, they had a ton of money in the bank right out of the gate. They had a great product. They had handpicked all these world-class executives from around the country, from SAP and Oracle and PeopleSoft, all these great companies, and they had everything going for them, and everyone said that this company was going to change the world, IPO, make a ton of money, and everybody had high expectations for them. Well, after they had been in business for a while, they called my little firm to do some work with their executive team. And God bless you. And so, oh, look, a bird, you know. And so we went to work to observe, before we started and did a 2-day offsite with this team, we went and observed one of their staff meetings just to kind of get a read on the team. And we learned 2 very interesting things about this team. First of all, they weren't doing very well in the market compared to some of their competitors. And it was very puzzling because they had so much promise. The second thing we noticed was that there was this one member of the team, it happened to be a woman, it doesn't matter, she was in charge of marketing. And whenever she spoke during the meeting, something strange would happen. She'd express her opinion, and everyone else would go silent. And there'd be this uncomfortable pause until they changed the subject and started again. So they would say, what should we do about this competitor? And she'd say, well, this is what we used to do at my old company, so this is what I think, and they'd be like, quiet. Total momentum killer until they changed the subject. Then the people on the team, and I said, why do you do that? What's going on there? And they said, because every time we disagree with her or have a different opinion, she never acknowledges that we might be right. She always insists that she's correct and defends herself. And we finally just decided, why bother? Why bother? So we thought that was interesting. A couple weeks later, we went and did a 2-day off-site meeting with that executive team. So we went off-site, and during the first day of that meeting, we talked about trust and vulnerability, but we also talked about strategy and tactics in the company and what they were doing in their business. And then that night, we went to dinner at an Italian restaurant where we had some wine with dinner, which of course is the great elixir of truth for most executive teams. Many of you found that out last night, probably. And so, after dinner, this woman had a few too many glasses of wine, and she stood up, and I couldn't write this, I promise. She stood up, raised her glass and said, she had a few too many glasses, said, okay, we've been talking about trust today, and I just wanted to let you know I've been married for 10 years to my husband now, and I barely learned to trust him this year, and so I'm probably not going to be trusting you guys anytime soon, if ever. Cheers. And we were like, cheers, all right. So the CEO and she and I went outside and talked about this, and we said, okay, here's the problem that this woman has. She has a fundamental trust issue. And it probably dates back to her childhood. I mean, it seemed pretty serious. And as much as we wanted to go get, a local priest or minister and Dr. Phil, I don't know if you know who Dr. Phil is, and this woman's mama in for counseling, we realized we couldn't afford to do that. We had to make this team work, but we also didn't want to just fire her. We said, we got to work with her and get her to open up to the team. So after a number of months, I worked with her and the CEO worked with her, and it became very clear she was not going to change. Her trust issues were that deep. She couldn't be vulnerable. So the CEO finally managed her off the team and out of the company. And do you know the very next meeting that we had without her there? The dynamics had changed so much that you would have thought they had swapped out every member of that executive team for a new one. Because if just one member of a team, and that's the moral of this story, if just one member of a team cannot be vulnerable, it's going to spread like a disease to the entire team. One member. Now, everybody's going to come at that differently. Oh, you're right? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. If one member of a team cannot be vulnerable, it's going to spread like a disease to the entire team. So how do we get our teammates to be vulnerable? And some people are going to come at it in different ways, different personalities, different histories, but we got to know that everybody's willing to be vulnerable and acknowledge their weaknesses. So how do we do that? Well, the only way to do it is if the leader goes first. If the leader is the first one to be vulnerable. Because see, if the leader can't be vulnerable, then nobody else is.
Okay. So that was about vulnerability, trust, and just want to share my experience. So I actually tried this out once. So in my last organization, I had one of the PMs reporting to me, and it was the performance cycle, what we are going through now. And so I had interpreted the rules of that particular PR cycle wrongly, and I actually made a mistake. Right? I actually made a mistake. And So by the time it was realized, obviously the normalization was done and so forth. Um, it was evident that I had made a mistake in what I did. So I, in fact, spoke with my HR, the HR manager and even my boss. And then what they said was, you know what? Just go with as this is the norm. Don't admit your mistake. And that actually ate me. You know, how can you, not do that? So eventually I actually admitted to this guy saying that, I made a mistake and this is what it is. This is what happened. Amazingly, he took it very positively. And even up to now, he still respects the fact that I was honest with him, and he still trusts me for that. In fact, he has told me himself that, you know what, out of all the people, I trust you because you stuck to it, whereas the other people were trying to hide their mistakes. So that's what vulnerability trust is, right? You don't have to be a manager, even with your own team and so forth. But the thing is, we are all humans. We must not forget that. We are a team of humans. We are not a team of robots. We are a team of humans. And therefore, even though managers are expected to do the right thing as always, we as managers will also make mistakes. But it's important that as managers, leaders, or leads in any way, that we admit it when we make a mistake. It's not a crime. There's no show of saying that, you're weak. I think you're actually shown that you're much stronger because to admit that you're wrong is much harder to do. And in the same way, teams, you all should not be afraid to admit that when you make a mistake. I know there is, you have the fear of getting penalized and so forth, but it's better to admit upfront that you made a mistake rather than hiding about it and losing more credibility at the end. So what I'm trying to say here is this goes both ways, right? I can preach about how managers and everyone do it, but it's both ways. Why? Because we are a team. And it's because I believe that we are a team is why I believe that each of us needs to express that same kind of vulnerability trust between each other. Yeah? So that's about trust. The second thing that we need to understand is we are all different. Right? If we were all the same, well, it will be a boring place to work in. Right? And I don't even have, too much, everyone is thinking the same way. But the reality is we are each different. And it's because of that fact there are so much of studies done on identifying the different personalities that exist. And this is just one profiling technique. It's called DISC, dominant, influence, and as you can see, right? There's another one called the Myers-Briggs personality test, right? But the message here is that they're each different. So when you apply a solution to one person, it doesn't mean that it works for the other. Managers, that's where we fail, right? We assume that the message that we want to give will just be accepted and understood by all, but it's not the case. And let me give you an example. If you take a dominant person, right? Just say you have a person who's very dominant. How do you think you should relay the message to him? Studies have shown that if you have a dominant person in your thing, he would prefer something straight. You don't beat around the bush. He wants it to the point. Because if you do it any other way, he actually gets annoyed. Now, if you want to give the same message to a humble person, a person who is, always a team player, accommodating, patient, humble, if I want to get something done, I can't be shouting at the top of my voice. Maybe that's my aggressive character. But to that person, I need to approach it in a different way. Like, hey, how's it going? You know what? You have done a great job, but I also think that you should do it like this. These are just examples of how you need to approach each one differently. And that seems to go for vice versa. If your boss, you need to identify and you need to understand that your boss belongs to one of these characters. Yeah? And depending on the personality of your boss, reach out your message. Example, I'll take Chanel, right? It's the most straightforward, open, to the point. If we are going to go with an update towards him, it needs to be to the point. You can't say, it's like this, once upon a time it was like that. He wants it to the point and crisp. But if it was another person like my previous boss in my last company, he's the person you can spend time with and talk about the history and all that and say how we came to this. You don't really need to have facts. But he feels, by just telling the story and sharing your grief, he will empathize with you. But the thing is, the different people have different style doesn't mean that they are a bad boss or good boss. They are all good. But it's just that we need to understand who they are. And based on that, we need to adjust our message. It's not a one rule for all. And it's because of this failure of understanding that there's more conflict between managers and staff. There's a lot of misunderstanding. But in fact, it's all because it's a personality clash that is there. Yeah. So remember, you need to spend time to understand it. And in fact, there are exercises out there. And what I would even advise you is, as a team, right, try one of these. And we, in fact, did this at Pearson, right? So I had this program, and we had 4 teams. Each team had 6 devs and 3 QEs. And we had this problem. We were operating on this one backlog. But the 4 teams and us, the management, we were not just syncing. There was something going wrong, right? And it all boiled down to, okay, there was a lack of trust. There was a lack of understanding who the other person was. You know what we did? We actually had a room like this. And we, in fact, launched this similar exercise. We launched this, and we identified people in the different quadrants. Now, I'm not saying that this is like a foolproof method, but it gives an idea, right? It gives an idea of who you're dealing with. And we actually managed to find out who fits in what. And we were able to find out, the way they prefer the messages to be communicated, the way they would like things to happen. It's amazing within the next couple of weeks, the bonding between the teams, right? People were more open. There was more of an effort to customize a message based on a person's personality. And it started to evolve. And in fact, the program became more and more united as we went along. Management and the staff were gradually bonding and working towards the same goal. All because we took some time to understand who the other person was. And this is not a straightforward exercise. It takes time. But imagine who your partner or the person you're dealing with, what kind of character, is amazing the amount of results you can get. So that's about different personalities. So we spoke about vulnerability trust. We spoke about the different personalities and how we need to adjust. And the last one, guys, we need to communicate. Silence is not golden, right? And let me give you a few examples. I know it's frustrating to the point where sometimes we tend to give up. We tend to say the same message, but it doesn't work. Sometimes there are surveys sent out, but there are no responses. Example, we have forums and sometimes people are unable to speak up. It's fine. But the thing is, we have to communicate if there are grievances. Because again, we are humans. We are not mind readers. You and I are not mind readers, right? So it's important to communicate in whatever form. Seize the opportunity whenever you have it. An example, if you have a survey coming up, I know you may have done 5 surveys, and there may have not been any action. But what's not to tell that maybe this response you give for this survey will cause a change, right? Change comes through persistence. Yeah. So it's important not to lose that opportunity, right? And make yourself heard. You can make yourself heard in a constructive way, not in an aggressive way or so forth. But it's important that you make yourself heard. It's important that when things are not understood, that you all need to say so, right? It's important that when things you don't really agree with it, you need to say so. Right? So, and my advice is always this: if you find yourself in an environment where you can't openly criticize, constructively criticize, not just criticize, constructively criticize, then I think you need to rethink about the way you work or where you work. Because it's not worth working in an environment where you're restricted. Yeah? Where at the end of the day, me included, all millennials, right? And it's important that we speak our mind. But there's a way of doing it, obviously. But it's important to communicate. Being silent means either you're not bothered, you don't care. And if that's the case, no one has a right to, complain about it. You need to persist. Because it's always good to be in a position where you say, I've said this many, many, many times, but no one took action. Rather than, why didn't you say so? So trust We need to identify the different personalities, and we need to communicate at the appropriate times. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.